Hello and welcome to today's special episode of Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I have a co-host today. We're doing a special episode. This is really awesome. I'm really excited about it. My co-host today is Austra Putnina, and we're just going to have a discussion and we're going to see how this goes and what the feedback is. And we're just going to have a conversation.
How did we get to this?
How did we get to this?
I'm a podcaster, right? So with that, we had a conversation. My podcast is currently paused, so I'm not doing the podcast until I get back to it. And I had a conversation with you, and I was telling you, I'm like, I love what you're doing, and I see your passion and all that. And I was missing doing the podcast. And pretty much what happened was that you somehow we got to the idea that we just could do like one episode a month or something like that, or once in a while where we just discuss certain topics that you have gone through in the episodes, or maybe I see something where I can add value. I personally can add more value from growth perspective, and I feel like you can add on both, like growth and healing, because you have gone through both. And I think to the extent we all are always still going through both.
Yes, measures of it for sure.
So I think that's pretty much how we got to it.
Which is great. I love it.
We just came up with an idea, and we were like, it would be really interesting to see what comes with this, and just having these discussions, because we both can talk for hours, like about all the but we have. So this is just pretty much your opportunity to listen into some of the conversations that we most likely will be having otherwise. Anyway.
Right. You're peeking in on our conversations.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing that I wanted to discuss today, and I wanted us to go through, was about, and this is something that we discussed when we had one of our conversations, about what's the difference between healing and growing. Because in several episodes, you mentioned that you don't believe that you ever get to the level where you're healed. And I would perceive it as for somebody who might be going through that journey, for them, it might be really discouraging to think about that. Oh my gosh, like this is never going to end. Like it, to an extent, it might make them feel like
hopeless.
What's the point? What's the point if this is never going to end? So maybe you can explain what you meant by that. And because when we discussed this, we were so much on the same like we were in agreement about it. But it's really about how we define or explain it. So I think it's really good to clarify that for listeners, so that I get a better idea of like what do you actually mean by that.
Yeah, because I can see why it could be confusing. And I remember, when we had that conversation, that's what came to mind, is that people could be really confused, because I talk about it like, oh, you never heal it, but yet I'm in a different place in my life and there's absolutely healing. So what I mean by that is I just believe that there's definitely measures of healing. And what that means is that event or that trauma or whatever no longer has a grip on you, that you can almost share it as a third person, like you're sharing someone else's story. And that's kind of how it feels a lot of times when I'm sharing my stories now. They don't have that profound effect. Like I don't physically feel it in my body anymore. It doesn't stir up emotion in me. And then when I'm done with the conversation, I don't have the overthinking of it, which is what used to happen. And so for me, that defines a measure of healing, which then means it opens up the door for me to grow. And so that's what I mean. And so you can have definitely a measure of healing where the trauma or the childhood abuse will no longer have that deep effect on you anymore.
So in a way, could it be that some of the disruptive patterns that you had, they're not showing up as much anymore, or they're not as common? Or if they ever show up, you're aware enough to kind of adapt or change, or not allow them to like take over?
Yeah, so they don't affect you like that anymore. And if it does, because sometimes they can catch you off guard and it can be like a trigger, right? And the self-awareness will, if you're paying attention, if you slow down and catch it, then I've said before, there's a pause between the actual trigger and the actual response. And that's where you can take a breath and you can catch it.
Yeah.
But it is certainly goes down significantly. Like when I think about, I've told the story in my first episode of what happened. And that was a pretty horrific situation, right? And for a long time when I shared that story, I physically felt it in my body, and there was shame. There was all kinds of emotions that came up. And now when I shared it in the episode, I was telling someone else's story, and it didn't have the effect on me.
Okay, so here I could add definition of healing,
There
because
you
that's
go.
where we
Yes.
also want to distinguish what's the difference between healing
And
growing, because then we can go to the next like part of the conversation where we see like how we actually in our lives see that. Because one thing is theory, something else is when you actually go through that journey, and you have gone through the journey. So healing is the process of making or becoming sound or healthy again. And I feel like this is so good, and such a good way to explain it, because growth starts, for you to get to the growth level, you have to get to that level of sound. I'm healthy. I'm like not neutral, but something like that. And then I can start to build up on top of that. So healing in my eyes, and that's why we had that discussion, because I was like, I don't think you never really heal, which is exactly what you meant. But you get to the stage where now you're in a healthy position. You have resolved some of the like patterns you had, or limiting beliefs, or some of the triggers. They're not really, some situations that would trigger you before, they're not triggering you to an extent where you now change your behavior or stuff like that. So now you're pretty much for most part in charge of yourself, and then you can start to build up to that.
You're no longer a victim to the abuse. You're not to the effects of the abuse. You become empowered.
Yeah. So you're not a victim anymore. Okay. No. Here, maybe what we can discuss then is what helps to go before we go to the growth, because that's like more down the line of the journey.
Right.
But if we talk about going from experiencing trauma or being in this like victim mode towards healing, like how does that transition look like? Or what are some of the things that, even before somebody is, let's say, starting their journey, how they know that, or like maybe in your experience, how did you know that, okay, or now looking back, you probably at the moment didn't know that, but looking back, like what were some of the signs that you knew that you're about to enter the stage of like healing? Because we can be in victim mode without even being aware that I'm currently like, I'm being a victim.
I totally was that. I was totally a victim mindset for sure. So I started out having a complete victim mindset, which means I didn't do anything wrong. I could point my finger at everybody else and give a reason why things were happening in my life, and it was everybody else's life, and I was taking zero responsibility for my behavior and what was going on. And of course I got a lot of pushback on that, and rightfully so. And so that made me kind of slow down, because I did have self-awareness, not to the degree that I do now, but I certainly, like, I didn't like the way I felt, and I didn't like the reactions I was getting from people. And I knew the common denominator was me. And so I started.
How did that feel to even realize that?
At first it was hard. At first it made me feel like I was defective, that am I ever going to get this right? But then with time, in the beginning of the healing, I started recognizing, oh, that means I'm actually empowered. That means I actually can change this. I can change my behavior. I can change how I think. I can change how I feel. I just didn't know how that looked, but that was kind of the first little glimmer of light for me, and actually was motivating for me, is that I just wasn't the victim and just I was at the mercy of everybody else and everything else. I actually could take that power and I could manage it myself. I just had to learn how.
Was there something that helped you to realize that? Because I think that's really important point in that transition towards starting to take steps towards healing. Because many times you might even know that I need to do some work, or I'm at fault, things like that, and nothing really happens. But then when you start to get that sense of, oh, actually, I have, even if at first it feels like tiny amount of power to change something or control or ability, that can really start to slowly build up that momentum towards like making that change. Was there something that helped you to maybe get that sense or realization that, oh, actually, I myself, I can do something about it, or I have the power to start to change something?
I don't remember anything necessarily happening. I just think it was my awareness. I think that I will say I was desperate. I was desperate to have things different. I just know I was desperate to live a different life, to feel a different way, to behave a different way. And I don't remember any particular thing setting that off other than I was desperate. I just wanted it to be different. I didn't want to live the way I was living.
So it was so bad that the alternative of going through the discomfort and pain and all that through growth, or let's say at this point healing, it felt more desirable than being where you are.
Yes. Yeah. And in all that, there was the people pleasing, right? And so I hated the way I felt. I hated the way I behaved. And I will say hate, I did. But I really hated the way I could make people feel. I didn't like that. That really tore at my heartstrings, but I didn't feel like, well, for a long time, I didn't have control because I didn't choose to have control over it. And I think that was more motivating to me than really taking care of myself. It was more motivating to me to get people to like me because I had a mindset that nobody liked me.
Actually, it would make sense because I think at that stage, there's not a lot of amount of self-love or self-respect to have you as a reason to change. But it's more like the pain of seeing how the way you are affects others that is like, ow.
Yep.
I just have to change it, because otherwise,
Yeah.
like, I will just keep and sometimes it might be just hurting people or being like a burden on people.
Yes.
Things like that. And with that, I think there is that, when it comes to social interactions, the importance of guilt and shame in these situations where, and this actually is an interesting point, because in this kind of scenario, guilt and shame might actually be something good because it was a trigger to start to change.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah, it was definitely, it was overwhelming. And yeah, I think you're right. A small, definitely guilt, definitely shame. Yeah. And I had many sleepless nights going over and over in my head, the scenario and how I could have done it different. And I wouldn't sleep. I mean, it was just this vicious cycle. It really was. I think, okay, next time I'll do it different. But again, I hadn't done the deep healing in order to get me to see it really the way I needed to and to behave differently.
Yeah. So pretty much what helps to, or let's say in your case, what helped to start that journey was that sense of like, I'm done. Like with whatever is the situation, I'm just done. And whatever discomfort might be on the other end of starting to heal or do any kind of work, that seemed less scary or intimidating than just staying where you are, that you just stay there so long that the pain had built up to a point where it's like, I'm just done. Like,
yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I used to joke about, I'm done. I always had that statement, like when I get to a certain point, I'm done. And I was done. Yeah.
So how does the healing journey start? What are the things that help to make those steps? Because now you're at the stage, or maybe somebody listening might be at a stage when they're like, I'm just done with where I am. I'm done. But what's next? Like, where do I go from there? I know I'm done, but like, what's the next, or what are the things that help to move into that direction towards healing?
So I say it in almost every podcast, but self-awareness is the first thing. And people who are healing, you're triggered easily. Things are out of balance. And so you really need to slow down and pay attention to your emotions and your feelings. And then when something comes up, And it's hard because sometimes you can sit there and you can feel this emotion. You're like, I have no idea why I'm feeling this. Why am I feeling like this? Is confusing. And I have found that journaling really helps with that. And you can just write down, I've got this feeling. Why do I have this feeling? And then just start writing down what is in your head. Don't think about it. Just put it on paper. Just start writing it down, and it's going to come out. And that is really kind of the start, in my opinion. And and if you can make that a practice, at first it's going to be a lot. It's going to feel like a lot. But then I don't know, there's just something to that. And then what you can do after you write, just keep writing until nothing else comes out. If you write 10 pages or 1 page, it doesn't matter. And then read it, and read it out loud. Read it out loud. It's important that you read it out loud. It's very different when you're reading something in your head than when you're reading it out loud. That is one tool that has really helped me over the years. I mean, one of the times I did that was really powerful for me. I was going through a big transition in my life, a big one. And I felt like I needed to go visit my parents. And so I went to their grave and I wrote them a letter. I still have it. I think it's 20 pages. I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then I read it to him. And I'm telling you, that was hugely healing. I don't know why. It was, but it was huge. It made me get a different view of my parents than I had before.
I think sometimes that why can get in our way. Like, not always we have to know the why. Good example is, like you said, about the emotion coming up. One of my mentors, she said it so well. So a lot of times when we enter our healing journey, there's a lot of emotions that we have been suppressing under there down. And what we do, it's like we have these balloons that we try to put down all the time, right? And then when we start to be open to the healing or feeling emotions, they start to come up. And many times we're like, where is that coming from? Like, what does it mean? But it literally can be something that was like 10, 20 years ago, emotion that we suppressed, and it's just released. And I think sometimes we have to give ourselves that, maybe allow ourselves to just be a mess, or just have no idea what's happening, or just feel emotions and be like, maybe this is just something that my body is releasing from years ago that it had been like suppressing, and it doesn't have to mean anything. It's just emotions coming out. And also not to get too attached to those emotions. That's something that I always say about the crying, that for me, I had like this transformation when it comes to crying, where and again, awareness was huge help with this. And there's another point that I want to make with awareness, or like warning. But in this situation, I was aware enough that as I was crying, I just started to see that thoughts come up, and most of them were negative. And then as I start to think about them and I start to pay attention to them, I now get more and more sad, and I cry more and more, and I start to go down this like victim mode, just like pity party pretty much. And then I changed it, where I was like, okay, I'm crying because there's emotion coming out. That's it. And then I would literally I would just cry. I'm done. I move on with my day. There's like nothing. I'm not attached to this story about myself. I'm this and that. Or, I'm not doing any of that. I just let emotion out, and I'm like, okay, do you need a bit more? Okay, let's get a bit more out. Okay, good. We're good to go. And then I just move on with my day. A bit puffy eyes, but still I move on.
And you feel better. Because that's the thing too. You said it, and I was gonna say it too, is that we don't have to put a story to everything. Everything doesn't have to have a story. And that's huge for me, because that's exactly what I have done over the years. I put a story to it. I try to put a meaning behind it. And you don't need to do that. You're right. You're absolutely right. Sometimes those emotions just need to release because they have been stuffed down for so many years.
Yeah. And I think especially at the beginning, maybe down the line, we can now start to look at if there's something that's repeating, there's some patterns, something, and start to resolve that. Correct. But at the beginning, and that's the warning that I wanted to make when it comes to awareness, because I went through it myself. And I was a teenager when I started to do all my self-development journey. And I had no mentors, no guidance, no nothing. I was just stumbling by myself, literally for years. And I see a lot of people go through this phase. I don't think that there's anybody who hasn't gone through this phase when it comes to awareness. In the beginning, we're not aware at all. We're just like automatic stuff. reactions or patterns, things like that. Then when we start to work on our awareness and we become more aware, there's a point that we become aware of everything that's wrong with us, everything. And you start to see how shit you are pretty much.
Yeah.
And you're literally like, this is wrong with me, this is wrong with me, this is wrong with me. And also be careful not to, because I did this for years myself, I am like this, and now because of the awareness you can tell because of da 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 da, and you just stick with that story and you don't even attempt to change it or question it.
You kind
it's
of excuse it.
Yeah, it's like a statement about yourself. It's a fact. I'm like this because of da 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 da. And that's another warning about awareness. It can be really helpful, but we don't want to stop just at the awareness, which is probably what we will get to as well. But another thing with what you mentioned, journaling is actually huge when it comes to awareness. And probably I also would recommend it as one of the best tools when it comes to awareness. And journaling actually is really good to do also, because you can't measure your growth in points or in some kind of measures. There are tests, things like that, but the best way how I have seen to measure my growth is if I go back and read some of my journals or like some of the reflections I did some years ago. I'm like, wow, I have grown a lot. Because many times, and that's actually what I had in my experience, because I was like, I knew that when I started my self-help journey, I had really low self-esteem, things like that, didn't like myself, was insecure, shy, and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't really know how bad it was until I went back and read some of the things that I wrote. And I was like, whoa, I was that bad. And in a way, it also gives you, if you're able to go back and see where you started, it gives you a perspective on how much you actually have grown. Because in the beginning, just like in everything, the growth is pretty big, because you're able to take big leaps, because now everything is new. You're just starting to, it's similar to my now like training for marathon experience. In the beginning, you're like, yay, you're just new distance. And then at some point you're like, the amount that you can increase distance every time, it's much smaller. And that's where it's easy to not see that growth, or now start to feel like you're not growing anymore.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. In the beginning, it is big, and there's, and it's exciting. You have a big aha moment. It's like, oh my, because it takes your life in a different direction. And then you're right. And then as you go on, there's smaller, there's not, and then it can be confusing. You're right.
Yeah. And you literally feel like you're now, I have been doing all this work and I'm stuck.
Right.
And a lot of times that causes you to stop doing what you were doing. And then you're literally stuck because you're not doing it anymore.
Right.
So with that, like going down the line, because listeners can be at any level of their like journey. As you go down the line, there will be a point where you feel like you're doing all the work, you're putting all the reps in, but nothing is happening. But that's what it is. You're putting in the reps, and it is, the work is happening, but it's not visible.
Correct.
It's still happening, but you're not seeing it. So trust the process, trust the journey, and most importantly, stay consistent, because that's the key. So that's pretty much with the beginning. I think that's something that, is there anything else that you would add that helps outside of awareness when it comes to starting this journey? No, and again, I think awareness is not something that you're like, click, I'm aware.
No. And you're going to mess up. You're going to goof up, like you're going to go along, and for a little bit, you're like, oh, I caught that trigger. Oh, I caught that trigger. And I worked through that or whatever. And then there's going to be a time where you realize after you've reacted to the trigger that, oh, and it's okay. It's okay. You know what? I will say one more thing. Give yourself a lot of grace. Give yourself, and don't judge yourself. It's a journey. You're not going to get it the first time, the second time. It's okay.
And actually adding to this, and this is something that I see a lot of people when I give them like all the baby steps and all that kind of stuff. Don't expect it to be perfect.
Yes.
It's
throw
something
perfection out the window.
It's easy to say, and I myself know that I was exactly the same, where I would start to, I think like it is more towards the growth. But still I had to go through certain level of like healing as well. But I would be like, oh, everything has to be perfect. If it's not perfect, like it doesn't count. Now looking back, I'm like, what? Like, how does it not count? But it's something that we have these thoughts or these beliefs that if it's not perfect, it doesn't count. And it's like, oh, if I don't do it like 7 times, it doesn't count. But I'm like, listen, you did it 5 times more than you did week before. Like, it counts.
Yeah.
Especially if you think about that adding up over the year. It's like, what, 250 extra times you do it? Really? It doesn't count?
Yeah. All those 250 times didn't count.
Yeah, exactly. One time. And that's something that be really cautious about that, because we tend to think that for things to, or for us to get result, we have to be perfect, or whatever we do each day has to be perfect. But actually, that's how you actually set yourself up for failure, because you might be perfect for like 2-3 days, even then questionable. But I would focus on how can I make sure that I can sustain it? So one thing that helps with that is don't make it too big too soon. Start small.
Yes. And I want to add to that, because I was just thinking this, because it's easy to get overwhelmed, because especially in the beginning, it's big, right? And like you said, you can go into this mode of recognizing all these things that, you need to fix on yourself, and it can be absolutely overwhelming, and it can be paralyzing if you let it. Absolutely. And so it's really easy to do that. And the best thing is just slow down and just take one thing at a time. Break it down, because if you look at the whole picture of everything that needs to be done, you're not going to be able to do it. It is overwhelming. And so focus on something that you feel like you can work on right away and make a change right away. Yeah. And again, it's a journey. And you there's not a deadline. It's not like you have to get it done next week. So give yourself,
even though you want to.
Oh, you don't, you totally do. And with each bit of health, healing and growing, it's just so motivating and exciting, right? So it does make you want it. I just want to be better. I don't want to feel like this anymore.
Yeah. But actually you can't get better until you feel those emotions.
You have to feel the emotions. The emotions, especially with trauma or abuse, it's stored in your body. You have to release it. It's going to come out some way. So you're better off working through it and letting it out so it doesn't come out a different way.
Yeah. And with this, actually, with that, don't rush it, or don't try to rush it. That's something that I see a lot of people, and same here, because we want to feel amazing today or yesterday,
right?
Or we want to have all our problems resolved within ourselves, literally like yesterday. With that not rushing piece, as you said, focus one day at a time, especially with some things that you might want to do or start to work on. If you now think about, oh my gosh, how far I am from where I want to be, like, how motivating is that to show up today and do what you're supposed to do, because you're like, there's so much ahead of me. But one thing that can help, which is something that we discussed when you were on my podcast, is that, and a lot of times we don't even know how that looks like, that future that we want to have, because you have never felt it. You have gone through trauma. You don't even know how it feels not to be triggered, not to be on alert all the time.
Exactly.
So what you can do is you can focus on just going as far away from where you are now as you can. That's it. Just one step at a time, one day at a time. You're moving away from that painful place that you are. And it doesn't mean that you're now jumping like leaps at a time. There might be times when there's a huge leap and you're like, whoa. But then you get back down on earth and you're like, shit, there's 20 more things to work on.
All these other steps.
Yeah. And with that, I know that it was this, for me, I would just beat myself up for like, oh, I'm working so hard and there's still this. But I would disregard the fact that I resolved that. I keep showing up. I keep working and putting time in myself, effort in myself. And it's like, we don't give ourselves enough credit for even wanting to do the work, not even talking about doing the work. Because, and that's something that I had a call with somebody who reminded me that he was like, because I said, and we talked about this before, I'm like, I'm just Austra, I'm just like normal person, right? And he said me like, in you showing up for yourself for like 12 plus years, putting in work on yourself, literally like I've been working on myself, my self-development full time pretty much all these years.
Mm-hmm.
That's not like nothing special. And I was like, interesting perspective. And many times we really define things like, what is it? Even like, what is something special? Like,
Yeah.
is you being completely free something special, or it's actually you showing up every single day and putting in the work? That by itself, it's so special, it's so powerful, because at any given day you could have made a decision not to show up today.
That's
and
right.
You still make decision to show up.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. You know, and on that, the other thing that I want to say about that too is, don't compare yourself to others. Don't compare your growth, your healing to others. It's so easy to do. Everybody's journey is custom. Remember that. No two journeys are the same. There can be similarities, but they're not going to be the same.
And they don't show you the real journey anyways.
Right. They show you a little snippet of that journey.
Yeah.
And so your
positive snippet.
Yeah, the positive, right? They're not showing you when they're crying in bed and they can't get out of bed for that day or whatever. But you know, compare yourself. Like you were saying earlier, you can go back to your journals and you can, you know, if you're like, I'm not feeling like I'm growing or whatever, or you start comparing yourself to others, only compare yourself to yourself. Go back, think about where you were a year ago, 6 months ago, 5 years ago. Are you that same person? I mean, I can't remember all the details of mine, but if I think back, I can tell you, like, the biggest part of my growth has been over the last 10 years, for sure. And I can tell you, I can think back where I was 10 years ago and where I am today. It's vastly different.
Yeah. And that growth wouldn't have happened if you didn't start at 19 years old.
Right. Right. Yeah. And there wasn't stuff out there at 19 years old, you know. It was a really long journey. And for many years too, I was in survival mode and didn't even realize it. And survival mode is not a healthy place at all.
Yeah. But even going through that, I think it's something that a lot of times we feel like we don't want to have that, which completely understand, makes sense. But at the same time, it's similar to, we all want to show up perfect, but it's like, it doesn't make you relatable. It doesn't make you human. What makes you human is messing up, or just, you know, being broken in certain areas and working towards healing them or changing them, improving them. Like, believe it or not, we all are like that. We think that everybody around us is like super perfect beings, but they're not. Like, they are. We all have our own demons. We all have things that we need to work on, and we all are trying to hide them as well at times. But if you think about it, we all have them. And in a way, that's something that, I don't know if it's a popular opinion, but it's something that I think, if we now think that I'm this special person with this like trauma and this and that, it can get in your way of growth. Yeah. Because now you start to use that to entitle yourself as this big traumatized person. And even though maybe somebody listening might not like to hear this, but it's something that we look for people who might have gone through similar stories and or experiences, things like that, just to give yourself hope. Because sometimes when we think that we're the only ones, we get in a hopeless place that you feel like, I can't get out of this place. Then if you, and I have had several people tell me, not only about when it comes to healing, but growth, like, oh, I'm too old to do this and that. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and find 10 people who started business after they were like 40 or 50, or started to dance when they were like 50 years old. And I will show you that what you just said, they proved not to be true. Correct. So sometimes it's helpful for us to look for other people who have gone through, and I think this podcast is a great resource for that, who have gone through like similar experiences or journeys, and through their stories, you can get hope in your own journey. As long as you don't feel like, oh, but they are different.
Right. They're special. They, that's for them.
Yeah.
And, and I go back to when I did the workshop, and the first night of the workshop, the childhood abuse healing workshop, we would have the women tell one quick story of their abuse. And what that did was create a connection. And for so many of them, they had never shared their story, or very seldom shared their story, because there's a lot of shame. And when you're sitting there, and I remember when I went through the workshop, there was a lot in my workshop. There was 25 women when I went through it. And it was interesting to sit there and go, I can completely relate to that. Somebody else felt like that. Oh my gosh. All of a sudden I'm not this, because I felt like a freak. I felt like I was the only person in the world that felt like that and had these emotions and feelings and dealt with the stuff that I did in my head. All of a sudden, it's not just me. And actually, there were women there that had it even worse than me. Not that I was downplaying mine, but it was like, okay, so there is more out there, and it creates a connection, and all of a sudden you're not alone anymore.
Yeah.
And that shame goes down. It's huge. That's huge.
That not sense of you're not alone, you're not the only one. And also with that, you get a sense that it's okay.
Yeah.
We're in this together, hand in hand.
Yep.
Walking this journey.
Yeah.
But it's something, I think it also, in a way, gives you permission to walk that path. And because you see that somebody else is doing it, and you're like, well, they had similar to me, maybe even worse. I might as well try and take the first step.
The one thing I was going to say when you're talking about perfection too, and you'll completely be able to identify with this, is that when you drop that perfectionism, there is such freedom in your life.
Yeah.
Whew, it is such a relief when you drop that perfectionism, and you're like, I don't know, it makes your life so much easier.
Yeah.
I mean, so many things go through my head, of how much easier my life is when I drop that. And it was a facade for me, because inside was a mess. I got tired of it. It's exhausting. And I realized that the one thing I realized is I was doing it for me. I was doing it to hide all the stuff that was going on inside of me. That's what I was doing. If I make the outside and everything around me look good, people won't see what's going on the inside. That's not true. They know there's something going on. And as I started to heal, I realized what I was doing. I realized how exhausting it was. And I realized how foolish it was, that I wasn't fooling anybody, including myself. And so I started to drop it, and I'm still dropping it, because it's still in my life, and I still catch myself wanting to do that. Like with this podcast, you've helped me with it, and I'm changing it because I'm trying to find it. But at first I was like, oh, I can't do it until I do this, and I can't do it until I do. No, because that's not helping people. This is helping people actually doing it.
Yeah. And yeah, it's something that, believe it or not, it will never be perfect.
It's not. We're human beings. It's just not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And it's hard to relate to perfectionism.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's so relatable. Like,
I know.
It's so weird how it works, because I know that for me, I wonder what helped me. I would have to think about it. What helped me to make that shift, because and that's, we most likely will talk about it from healing to growth in the next conversation. But one thing that I know that really helped me to start to change things and accelerate my growth was letting go of that perfectionism, and be okay with things not being perfect. But I think one of the things that helped with that was letting go of the meaning of that. That if you're not perfect, it doesn't mean you're this and that.
Right. It's not an identity.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of started to even look for opportunities to do something where I know it won't be perfect. Like I did with my challenge, or several other things that I have been, even now preparing for marathon. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm like, we'll see where it takes us. So far, so good. But it's something that that perfectionism most likely wouldn't even allow me to make certain decisions. I would just postpone them. And it's something, I think big thing was that meaning that I would attach, and also what others would think, because if you're not perfect, they must think that you're a mess up or you're whatever, failure and all that kind of stuff, and we don't want to be rejected by others.
Right.
And I think with this actually really important point that can be helpful towards slowly moving towards a sense of being healed, or more towards being ready for growth element of your journey, is that sense of confidence in yourself. Because when it comes to other people's opinions, the less you believe in yourself, the more they matter.
Yes. Say that again. Say it again.
So the less you believe in yourself and the less confidence you have within yourself, the more you value other people's opinions.
Oh, so true. 100%. 100%. And, I used to proudly say I'm a chameleon, because I would adjust myself to people because I wanted to be accepted. And I completely lost myself. I've been just rediscovering myself over the last 7 years, and finding out things I had no idea.
Those people.
Yeah.
I know that I did. I would be like, oh, I would be this, like, I always identified as somebody who always has to be there for others, always have to support, have to be the strong one and all that. And I would literally sometimes feel like I just have to say yes because I'm this person. But and this is where I learned that what happened was that over the time, the more I started to build up my confidence and believe in myself, which by the way, confidence is just you keeping your promises to yourself. Right. Until you just say you're going to do something and you know you're going to do it. Initially, you say you're going to do something. Yeah, right. Because you usually don't do it. We'll see. Because you're afraid and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so the more I started to build confidence, I literally I ended up like trading what I thought others think of me into what I think about myself. So now that is more important than what others think about me. Or at least it has more power, because I believe there's still some work to do, but it's something that what others would think, or what I think they would think of whatever I say, doesn't have the power over what I'm gonna say, because I am more connected with myself and what I find valuable and what I find important to me, and for that, it's something that, again, you build that as you go through that journey. There is no shortcuts to confidence. There is no shortcuts to healing or growth. There's no shortcuts. And as much as I don't want to say it, and for me, sometimes I literally, when I talk to people, I don't want them to feel the pain. I don't want them to feel all these negative emotions that come with growing or healing and all that. But I know they have to do it. They have to go through that. And the best that I can do is to hold their hand or be there if they need me, but I can't walk the path for them. That's their path to walk. And that's something that is important, because like a lot of times everything you see, most people, and that's one of the things that I like about your podcast, that most of the times we see people on the other end. Oh, I'm amazing. Everything is and they're
right. And their life is so different. It's so wonderful. And you know, that's not where they started.
and you don't see what it takes, because a lot of times people are ashamed of it, or they don't even want to think or remember that pain, because it's a lot of pain. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of discomfort to go through. But it's important to share that, so that you know that it's not like your journey is much harder. Like a lot of times when it comes to self-development, you go through a lot of frustration, pain, and all that. Like I go through all that myself, like all the time. You doubt yourself, and then you're like, no, I got it. And then you doubt yourself, no, I got it.
That little
what
dance
happens over time is, and this is something that also relates to focus. Like some people have asked me, like, how do I make sure I never like lose my focus? And I'm like, spoiler alert, you're gonna lose your focus. But what matters is how quickly you
bring it back.
Get it back. Exactly. And it's the same with your growth journey. You will get off track. You will you will walk in the path that is like, there's no end to it. Like I have to walk back. But what matters is how quickly you get back on it. And as long as you do that, it's you will find a way. I haven't seen a person who, as long as they keep showing up for themselves consistently, that they don't find a way or they don't grow or develop. It's just like, I haven't seen it myself.
Right. And the other thing I was going to say too with this is pay attention to that voice that's in your head. Pay attention. There are so many thoughts that go through our mind, and whose voice is that? Like, I recognize, I don't know, it was probably 6-8 months ago that one of the voices in my head was not mine. It was one of my abusers, and she screamed at me a lot. And all of a sudden one day I stopped and I went, wait a minute. And I mulled the thought over, and I thought, that's not my thought. That's not coming from me. And it was actually, I was screaming at myself, and I don't do that anymore. And so why was I screaming at myself? And so I just shut that voice right down. So pay attention. Yes. Question your thoughts. Yep. Because they zip through your head. And there's so many that we aren't even aware of, but the ones that you could pull in and pay attention to, anything that is not conducive to yourself.
Okay. Actually, here's a good exercise that I can give as we slowly close off. That can be helpful with your thoughts, because most people, they don't even know how negative they think.
True.
So what you can do is take, like, I don't know, at least one day when you just, whenever you remember, just write out whatever happens in your mind. Don't think about it. Just write out all the thoughts, everything. And then once you have done that, go through it and highlight: green, positive thoughts, red, negative thoughts. And then you will, as you do that, like, speaking of awareness, you will start to become aware of the thoughts that are repeating all the time. You will actually become aware as you write down already.
Yeah.
But you'll start to become aware of, like, this thought, it just keeps repeating. So, like, it's something that it's a good exercise to go through too, because many people are, they might actually not know how negative, or even that they are negative. They just think, I'm neutral or I'm positive. And then when you look at your thoughts, it's like, is it really the case?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I used to have one. I used to say to myself all the time, and I actually said it out loud for years: I'm so stupid. It got to the point where it was literally, I would say it, and it didn't even feel like it went through my brain, if that makes sense. Like, all of a sudden I would hear myself saying it. I would do something and it would just come out of my mouth. And one day all of a sudden I went, I heard myself, where before I had heard myself, but it was like, yep. I believed it. And I don't know what happened one day, but all of a sudden I heard it and I went, wait a minute. Yeah. And I what I had to do, and this took a while. Okay. This took a while because I had years of saying that to myself, but I would catch myself. I became more and more aware, and I got to the point where I'd say, I'm so, and it would start to come out. I'd stop, blessed, or whatever.
Oh, nice.
I found blessed was mine. That was mine that I replaced it with. And it took a while because it was so automatic for me. It was bizarre when I think back on it. And I can't even tell you the last time that came out of my mouth or even thought it.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add as we close off?
I don't think of anything, honestly. Let me think a minute.
All I can say is just pretty much what we said, like, be patient.
Be patient, give yourself grace.
To be perfect.
Lose perfectionism, lose it.
Yeah.
Lose it.
Just one day
slow
at a time,
down.
One step at a time.
Right.
That's right. How you started. That's how you slowly go and transition.
And I know some people get nervous about journaling because they're like, oh, somebody might read my stuff. And don't worry about that. And if it's to the point that you're not going to journal, write it down and then burn it. Start out that way. Because if you do that, you'll eventually get to the point where you're gonna be like, I don't care if someone reads this. But in the beginning, don't let it stop you from moving forward, because that is, writing stuff down is powerful. So we would love to have your feedback on this, what you think of it, and if there's any other topics or questions you may have, so we can have more discussions like this.